Well, thanks guys for the opportunity to come share. I'm excited to be here. I'd be more excited if it wasn't raining, because I was really looking forward to walking up and down the mall and some of that stuff. But it's cool because I got a lot of work done, which is good too. But no, I appreciate the opportunity. I love this topic. I love the topic of personalization because I feel like Sitecore has done a great job selling the value proposition of the product. They've done a great job selling the vision of what Sitecore can do. But there's a big gap between that vision and the day-to-day operations of actualizing that value. And that's where I found that most of my customers struggle is they pay a lot of money for an awesome platform, but they're struggling to get that value that they originally thought they'd be getting. And I think personalization is a significant opportunity to drive value. We just have to take it out of the clouds, so to speak, and get down and dirty with the tactical day-to-day operations around personalization so that we can actualize that value. So that's why I love the topic, because it's really pragmatic. It's where you can start to get the promises fulfilled out of the platform that you've been looking for. Real quick, show of hands, raise your hand if you're primarily a marketer in the room. So we got 3 or 4 marketers, great. So I assume the rest of you are developers. Raise your hand, developers. Okay, so we're about 40, 60. For the developers, content managers, I do have 1 line of code in my slide presentation, so I'm not neglecting the developers. So just you have that to look forward to. I'll make sure to spend a lot of time on that 1 slide. You can soak up that line of code, and hopefully that'll appease your desire there. But this is primarily a marketer-focused presentation. My goal here is to spend a little bit of time describing the capability, but more practically, my plan is to spend time talking about how to take advantage of this capability. What are customers doing? What's the step-by-step, and what are the next steps to start getting value on the platform? So just a quick definition. Personalization is all about being customer-centric, knowing who our customers are, what they're trying to accomplish, knowing what experience they need and at what time. And that's what personalization seeks to deliver, is the right experience for the right customer at the right time. Dynamically tailoring that site to the needs and wants of each user. So hopefully that just kind of couches what personalization is, probably not a surprise to anybody in the room. It's kind of a buzzword, right? We've all heard of personalization. It sounds cool. You definitely are probably thinking, yeah, I need a little bit of that. The next step, though, is what does personalization mean for me and my customers, and how do I start using it? I like this slide here. This is a picture of a motorcycle. You all agree? It's a motorcycle. Here's another picture of a motorcycle. To me, personalization in Sitecore, the spectrum is no less significant. It's a buzzword. And on the one hand, you can be very tactical. Personalization can kind of be a toy. You maybe are doing some GYP detection and swapping out imagery. And because of that, you're saying, yeah, we're doing personalization. Well, you kind of are, yeah? I mean, you're configuring some stuff, but it's pretty tactical. You're not driving a ton of value for your business, but you are using it. On the other side is more transformational personalization. This is where we're really digging into who are our customers and what experience they need to do for them to accomplish what they're seeking to accomplish. A couple examples. I've worked with 2 big banks that I think it kind of highlights the spectrum a little bit. One bank is a national bank, and a business objective of theirs is to create a more local feel, right? So big national bank, they're in a lot of markets. They want to be seen and felt like a community bank. So thinking about that objective, it was pretty easy to come up with some personalization opportunities around personalizing imagery to use local imagery to help create that connection. So I just mentioned GYP detection there, then swapping out imagery such as a skyline for a city or something like that to help create that more emotional connection for that user to that bank being a community bank. you could definitely say that is important, and that is a good thing to do, and it's super low-hanging fruit, and yes, that creates value, but I do put that on this side of the spectrum, so to speak. To highlight the other side of the spectrum is another bank who is a national bank too, but their objective was to really partner with their customers through the home buying journey. Okay, so think about buying a home for a minute. That is a long journey. You have to go through, maybe it's, am I qualified for a loan? Do I have an agent? Don't I have an agent? Researching different markets, understanding what's important to me, finding a house, getting pre-approval, securing a mortgage. It's a long process, and that buying journey is complex. And so what they wanted to do is have a content strategy that really illuminates for them where that customer is in that journey. And based off of our understanding of where they are in that buying journey, we're going to personalize our experience to best meet the needs of that person at that time in their home buying journey. And so now that bank becomes an advocate for the customer. It becomes a tool they use to help them purchase a home. And so you can start to kind of see two different banks, two different personalization strategies. Certainly both are creating value for the business, but one to a much more significant degree because they're transforming how a person buys a house. So I use that example just to kind of demonstrate that when we talk about personalization today, it's really important, I think, to think big. To think about how are we going to transform our digital experiences to really enable a different kind of conversation with our customers versus what I think is often where people stop. They think of personalization more as a toy, like, hey, we should do a little bit of that, a little bit of that, and I think we can go a lot deeper and create a lot more value. So that's kind of my objective today, is to help you think about how do you, with your customers or your company, move beyond the basics and really think about transformational personalization for your customers. I'm going to do this by covering 5 different topics. Raise your hand if you have configured a personalization rule in Sitecore. So I'd say 3/4 of you. I'm going to do a little bit of basics because there are a few people in the room who have never done that before. So really quickly, I'll just cover some of the basics. Next, I'm going to move into persona mapping. If you're a marketer, you're probably familiar with the term personas. I'm a huge fan of how personas help illuminate the customer and who they are, their goals, their motivators, and that's all great data that we can take and capture and personalize based from. So we're going to talk a lot about how do you take your personas, map that into Sitecore, and drive personalization opportunities from them. Beyond that, we'll talk about automating journeys, marketing automation. Obviously, we want to deliver the right experience to the right customer at the right time. And time is important. You think about a customer journey of buying a home. Where they're at in that journey, the content is going to be totally different based on where they're at, as far as what content would be applicable to them in that point in time. We'll talk a little bit about testing. With personalization, you're going to be trying a whole bunch of stuff, and you want to understand the impact of what you're doing. And then lastly, getting started. None of this is important if we can't find those next steps to value. And so hopefully at the end of this, I'll leave you with some pragmatic next steps that you can take back to your clients or your company tomorrow and start getting value right away. So just a little bit about me. I'm an MVP on the digital strategy side. I've written a couple books. Sitecore Configuration Strategy is more from a marketer's perspective of what the tool is, how to use it, how to set it up. So it's more of that end user manual. And then I partnered with Jason Wilkerson to write the Sitecore Dev book as well. So check those out if you haven't already. I'm a freelance consultant. My business is Viridian Solutions, but I'm a freelance consultant. I'd love to help anybody out who needs another pair of hands with strategy work or on optimization work. And you can find me at my Twitter handle there or on LinkedIn. So, to kick us off, there are 3 types of personalization. Sitecore really only talks about 2 types, but the way I think of it as 3 types of personalization. And the first one is rules-based personalization. Rules-based personalization is basically a if this, then that kind of personalization. So if this person is from Cincinnati, show the Cincinnati skyline, for example. It's pretty tactical, but it can be pretty impactful. Sitecore is adding more and more out-of-the-box rules all the time. I think when I first wrote my book, there were like 50, and now there's over 100 out-of-the-box rules. And so these rules-based, these rules are getting more and more robust over time and creating a lot more value. But that's basically the idea around rules-based personalization. Is you configure basically an kind of scenario. The next kind of personalization is behavioral personalization. So Sitecore can learn about the behaviors of your customers over time. Those behaviors exhibit different patterns. Patterns of behaviors can be really interesting. Those patterns of behaviors create a lot of interesting personalization opportunities. And in fact, that's where I start to dip into personas. Sitecore doesn't use the terminology persona. They call it a profile. I like the term persona because marketers get what a persona is. And a persona is a cluster of behaviors. And that's what's great about what Sitecore can do is it can understand these patterns that this customer is observing over time. We could look at 12 months of data, and based on those 12 months, we can visually see where they're at in that journey and how their behaviors are changing over time, and essentially map those behaviors to a journey and personalize off of that. So it's really significant. Definitely we're moving into the more transformational phase here. Raise your hand if you do a lot of B2B work. Probably, if you're in consulting, probably knows a lot of it. B2B, I think this is really important because in a B2B business, the buying journey is long and complex. I'm not on Amazon searching for, a book or a camera. I might do a little bit of research and then I'm making a decision right there. In B2B, these are long, relationship-driven sales cycles that take a lot of learning, a lot of research. There's a lot of opportunity to map content to these behaviors so that we can understand those behaviors and personalize to help influence the pace of that buying journey. And in B2B, this can be really significant because B2B marketing is hard. It's much harder to understand where a user's at in that buying journey. And a lot of the decision making, 70% of the purchase is decided before they even contact you. So how do you interject your company into that first 70%? Well, you're going to be doing it with these kinds of mechanisms. You have a good content strategy that understands the behaviors of users, and you're personalizing to get a feel for where that person's at and to drive conversions and those kinds of things. So I'm pretty excited about that. Right up. The next one is automated personalization. So I've talked a lot about a buying journey. And again, it's the right experience for the right user at the right time. That time is super important. Again, if you think of B2B life cycle, 70% of that journey, we don't even know who they are. And so having an anonymous feed of behavioral data that we can use to create a one-on-one marketing experience has significant importance and significant ROI as well. And so that's kind of the idea with this automated personalization. Let's understand our customer's buying journey. Let's build that journey into our digital experience. And based on the stage that they're in, we're going to personalize the experience to provide the best experience for that user in that stage in the journey. And so now they are truly going to get the right content for the right person at the right time because we have that awareness of who they are and what content they need to make the best decision possible. Does that make sense? Any questions here? All right. So, rules-based personalization. Since most of you are familiar, I'm going to go through this somewhat quickly. Here's the experience editor. You've probably seen this. Raise your hand if you do 100% of your content entry in the experience editor. Yes, 1, 2. All right, good. You guys, you have a good partner probably. I don't know anything.
I do know.
The experience, I still find most of the customers I go into are primarily using the content editor, which is a shame. And they usually have to do that because the developer didn't set it up correctly. But that's something that I really champion is the marketer should never have to go to the content editor. In fact, they should never want to because it's such a horrible user experience. But anyways, that's my sidebar. So all you partners, that's what you're driving for, is banish the content editor. It's all about the experience editor. But when you select a component here, you can see the little people icon that's selected there. That's the personalization icon. So when you click on this, it loads up your rules selector. And this is where you can choose which rules you want to use to personalize the component. This particular example has 4 different rules configured. It's done sequentially. So basically the first rule to match is the one that wins. And so in this case, I'm saying where, if this then that, so where the regions, Georgia or California or Ohio, otherwise use this. And in each case, I'm selecting a different piece of content to be used. So first one in wins, otherwise we have a default at the bottom. And that's how you swap in and out content. This is an example of the rule picker. So again, there's 100 different out-of-the-box rules you can use to drive personalization. I just showed you some GUIP ones because they're easy to understand. But there's a lot in there. I'm not going to go through them all. They're pretty self-explanatory. Here's my line of code. Okay, everybody look carefully. I bring this up because it's super easy to create custom rules. And I would think 90% of you will need to do this. Everybody has unique personalization requirements, and creating a custom rule is super easy. It's just a method that extends rule context and returns true or false. And obviously there's some code in here that goes and does something, maybe looks something up in a user profile or goes to an external system. But it's really easy to create your own rules in here to really create value. One tip, one of my favorite custom rules for you guys to consider would be a rule that looks at a generic attribute in a user profile. So one of the most common things you're going to do is extend your user schema to have custom metadata, right? You might have metadata from Salesforce, you might have metadata from IBM, you might have metadata from your ERP. You bring that user context in your user profile. And wouldn't it be great if there was one rule that could say, get me, if field X equals Y, and if you could create a generic rule that just says, that just points at a property in the profile and lets the marketer type in the value they expect, that one rule has almost infinite applicability because now I can personalize on any piece of metadata in a user profile. I'm sure Sitecore will have that rule someday. If they've developed it in the past 6 months, I apologize because it might already be there. But I tell everybody about it because I think it's one of the most just usable rules that could exist if they would create it, and I create it for my customers all the time. Let's talk about behavioral personalization. Now that was the easy stuff. You probably came here knowing everything I've already mentioned. So it's time to start getting serious and talk about some of the more transformational personalization. So when I talk to marketers, I like to talk about segmenting strategies because marketers segment customers all the time, especially for email. They have hundreds of lists probably of different slicing and dicing of customers. And I like to mention that because I think it helps them think through personalization a little bit because they probably have these segments of users already for their email campaigns. And thinking about a segmentation strategy and a personalization strategy, there's a lot of parallels there. Because that's essentially what we're trying to do, is we're trying to segment our customers. But instead of for an email campaign, we're creating a segmentation strategy for our digital experience, our web experience. So if we work so hard for our email campaigns to send the right message to the right person, why not work equally as hard for our digital web experiences? Because in all likelihood, that's where we're going to attract the most net new customers who aren't on our email list. Getting some of those direct hits to convert is part of the game. I like to talk about persona. Persona is not a common segmentation strategy, obviously, but in the future now with Sitecore it can be, and I think there's a lot of potential there, which we'll talk more about in a bit. So how does this work? So basically, as a user browses around, they're interacting with content. Okay? What you can do is you can tag content with different levels of points. They accumulate points as they browse that content. And basically what Sitecore looks at is it looks at the distribution of those points across different patterns. Those patterns can be mapped to personas or whatever they might want to be, but that's basically what we're personalizing off of, is the distribution of patterns, points, sorry, that map to these patterns. It's kind of a mouthful. Let me even go a little deeper into nomenclature land. Behind the scenes, Sitecore has a concept of a profile, which is a collection of profile keys, aka behaviors. Behaviors are mapped to profile cards, aka I call those personas. And a pattern card is what takes that distribution of points and maps it to the profile, aka the persona. So that was super confusing. I don't even know if I understand it. A picture's worth 1,000 words. This is basically how you would build this out in Sitecore. Within the marketing control panel, you have profiles. I call this one persona. You could call it whatever you want. These do not have to be personas. I could have a profile card called high-level content and low-level content, because maybe my users have different preferences around the degree of content. Maybe somebody prefers the spec sheet versus somebody prefers a video, right? It can be whatever behaviors it wants. I just like personas, and that's how the example I have here. So this profile card here is a persona. These are the behaviors, the keys. So in this case, this is an example of a set of personas I created for an intranet. It's not a common example, but when you think about employees, different employees exhibit different kinds of behaviors when they go to an intranet. You know, in this case, maybe somebody is trying to find an app. They want to find an app super fast. Maybe somebody is a common contributor of content. So a contributor experience might be different than somebody else. A learner is somebody who consumes content to educate themselves. You know, people finder, somebody who's interested in policies, corporate policies. Bottom line is, whatever the behaviors that you've identified on your websites, you can map those in as keys, and these keys get laddered up to the profile card, aka, in this case, a persona. Lenny has this distribution of points. I should be making use of my little laser. There we go. Then I won't be blinded. So Lenny has this distribution of points along the lines of these behaviors. So in this case, app seeker was given 2 points, learner was given 10 points, policy 5 points. And so as a user browses content, they are starting to accumulate points that get mapped to this distribution, and the distribution through the pattern card right here gets mapped up into the persona. That's a lot. Does that make sense? All right. I already mentioned this. You don't have to do personas. In fact, I don't always recommend personas. Sometimes you want to get tactical. In this case, I had a site where they wanted to understand just vacation types. Different people have different preferences around vacations, and we can use a good content strategy to kind of ferret out what kinds of vacations they prefer. If we know they prefer golfing, you know, our calls to action, our newsletters that we email, our email strategies, whatever it is, we're going to be targeting that person differently from somebody who's, you know, well, I won't go there, but you get the idea. So I've talked a lot about personas. I'll talk a little bit more about personas. I like it because marketers know what they are. Probably you have personas already. Raise your hand if you've, well, there's only 4 marketers in the room, but raise your hand if you spent $40,000 hiring some agency to come in, build some great personas, and then you put them on the shelf and you haven't looked at them for 6 months. I'm not seeing any hands up, which is good, but I'd say that's probably 95% of the case. You spend a lot of money developing these personas to do what? To influence what features you build. Because you want to understand your business objectives, you want to understand who your users are, and you want to understand what features will create the most value for those users. And personas are a great tool to do that. The trouble, though, is you put them on the shelf and you don't ever get any future value out of personas. The nice thing now in Sitecore is I can actually take Lenny and build it into the platform. And the great thing about this is now, over time, I can observe if my understanding of Lenny is true or not. You know, I could come to find out that turns out Lenny isn't acting like Lenny. Lenny is acting a whole lot like Paula. And now our content strategy needs to evolve. Or maybe Lenny starts exhibiting new behaviors that we didn't think Lenny cared about. Or maybe we've mapped all these personas into Sitecore, and it turns out of our 6 personas, only 2 of them actually have content representation. And now we're underserving our customers in certain areas. So now it really illuminates our content strategy, because we can see that we built a site for Lenny, and Paula is struggling. We're not converting Paula. Paula is our growth strategy. You know what I mean? So that's what I like about these personas, because it really, first of all, we're going to get infinite value out of them, because we can use them to learn about our customers over time. They'll evolve over time. That persona will become a living and breathing artifact. And it helps with our content strategy too. We can see, you know, where is our content best optimized and where do we have gaps. So this is just an example of a persona. You know, personas obviously outline the customer's goals, what they're here to do. It outlines what we want that person to do. Maybe it outlines things that they don't like, things that they struggle with. And if you're familiar with some Sitecore nomenclature, this is a key tip. Personas created in the abstract aren't super helpful. You might have some personas today that are super high level, kind of abstract, kind of lofty. The opportunity now with Sitecore is to make your personas a little more granular, a little more measurable. In Sitecore, we have these things called events, goals, failure events, and outcomes. And actually, when I create personas, or when I'm working with an agency that's creating personas, I love to push back and try to help them understand, for each bullet, we need a measurement strategy. How are we going to measure that? How are we going to create a KPI off of this goal? And the nice thing about it is, with Sitecore now, we can actually map each one of these things to events, goals, failure events, and outcomes, and measure the effectiveness of the persona. And again, this is how we learn about our customers over time. We might map all of these events, we plug it into Sitecore, and then 6 months later, it turns out, well, there's actually these 3 behaviors we didn't know about, and these 3 behaviors never happened. And now we can update Lenny based on that. I think I kind of already mentioned this. Keep track of time. Here's a piece of content. I kind of cheated here. This is a content editor. Please forget about that for a second. But basically over here on the right-hand side, you have this blue box. If you click on that blue box, that's what brings up the profile tagging window. Here's an example of that. So I pull that up, and now I can tag that piece of content with a persona or with a profile. And so that's how you tag all of your content in your website to these profiles. And that's how Sitecore can know when a user hits that piece of content, apply this spread of points. And so that's how they start accruing points over time. Now, you can even do an unequal distribution, because, you know, not every piece of content is perfectly situated for one user demographic, and so you might want to think through a distribution that makes sense. Obviously, all of this gets mapped into the profile, and that can be really great. So again, if you think about email marketing, creating a segmentation strategy around persona can be super effective. I could do an extract of all my customers who exhibit a Lenny persona, and I could create a targeted message, a targeted email for that customer, all because that's stored in every single user's profile. That's another good opportunity for CRM integration. you know, if you're integrating your user profile in Sitecore with your contact record in Salesforce, for example, that can be really effective for a seller to call into a person and have a ton of insight on every interaction they did in Sitecore, what kind of user this is, what behaviors do they exhibit. You could do lead scoring and all kinds of, there's a ton of opportunity there as well. All right, so, question? Yeah.
Yeah, from that association I work for, you know, it has their AMS, customer relationship system, whatever we're going to call it. But do you find that starting from that, you have this information already established, start there, and then work that into Sitecore rather than try to build the personas, but use that as the basis for the personas and have Sitecore communicate with that well, so that you can start building your Sitecore profiles based on that rather than...
Yeah, I think there's a couple different ways to do it. There's assumption-based personas, which are just, hey, let's get in a room and talk about who we think our customers are. And there's research-based personas. Those research-based personas are more quantitative. You could be looking at the data you have and extrapolating out what we think those behaviors are. In the case of having a system of record like that, a good place to start could be to take what you do know. So let's just say you had 10 potential personas, but you only know about 2 of them. Well, one opportunity could be to go through the whole dog and pony show and create all 10, and then map them into Sitecore. The other opportunity could be start with what you do know, with some more generic profile cards about our users. You can always add personas later after you've done the analysis. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So start at a high level.
Yeah.
And you know, maybe port from either the AMS or even from email software, since that's somewhat targeted.
Like an example could be those vacation types. It's pretty tactical, but yet still has a significant personalization potential. And you might have a lot of that insight already in your current CRM, just based off of maybe notes that salespeople have taken about customers. You could extrapolate those notes out into their user profile and create profile cards based on that. Yeah, we can talk more later about some of those ideas too. Any other questions? Yeah.
Not a question, but more of a comment. I know they talked about obviously importing the information from the Salesforce. Sales reps can get information from it. But another thing also is that if you have the personas actually showing within Salesforce or your CRM, you can allow the salesperson to actually dictate which persona they want them to be in.
You could, yeah. Maybe they just jumped on a phone call, talked to this person, they're like, you know what, this isn't Lenny, this is Paula. And they could flip that bit. And now that person's user experience could be totally different the next time they come in. That's a fair point. So at the end of the day, this is really just another rule. I like to call it behavioral personalization because having 3 types of personalization just sounds better. But in the end of the day, it's just another rule. You can see here where the current visit matches the Paula pattern card in the persona profile. So that's basically how we're setting up that personalization. The significance of this is a lot of my customers, at least, they have a editorial team and they have a digital team. They have a content authoring team and they have a marketing strategy team. The reality is these 2 worlds are so interdependent now because your content strategy and your digital marketing strategy are dependent on each other. Because if I have a digital strategy around these different personas, but I don't have the right content that speaks to that persona at that point in time, it doesn't matter. You can set up all the personalization in the world, but if you don't have the content that meets that user need, there really is no point. And so I'm starting to see in the market more and more of a convergence where these 2 teams start to become one team, or at the very least, there has to be a lot more collaboration to ensure that the strategies and the content that enables those strategies are written and co-created. So it's something to think about. Last piece here is around automated personalization. So we've talked a lot about a customer journey. You may have journey maps that your marketing teams have built out. This is not a good example. That's just something I grabbed off of Google probably. But the idea here is to actually take that journey map and build it into the platform so that we get that situational awareness around where they're at in the journey. What this enables now is what you can come up with is a 3D kind of matrix personalization strategy where you have your persona here, you have your journey stage here, and based off of that you may have different content requirements for every different persona and every different stage. I mentioned 3D because I was working with a manufacturer, and we had personas, we had a buyer journey, but they also had industry. And so in their case, they had a 3D content strategy. And obviously not every piece of content on their website they would have to write 4 times. I mean, there's some places where you need to do it, and the other 95% of the time, the same piece of content works for everybody. But where there's significance in their case, they had different content for each persona, for where they're at in the buying journey, and an industry flavor. So again, digital strategy and content strategy are totally dependent on each other to really bring this to life. But you can see here, I have almost infinite personalization opportunities to show this piece of content instead of that piece of content. That's a personalization rule that I configured for that instance. And they all work together. So engagement plans in Sitecore is how you do this. Basically, engagement plans have states. These are the stages within the journey. There are conditions in between states that determine if the user should move from one stage to the next. And I can have actions. So when a user does move from one stage to the next, these are actions. These are things we can do. We can send an email. We could add them to another marketing campaign, add them to a drip campaign. We could remove them from a campaign. There's all kinds of stuff you can do here. But that's basically the building blocks of engagement plan. Is you have a stage, a condition, and an action. A stage is where are they at in the journey. The condition is what predicates them moving from one stage to the next. And an action is what happens when they move from one stage to the next. So I'm basically modeling this journey right in the tool. And the opportunity here is now I can personalize based off of which stage they're at. This is a screenshot of an engagement plan I built for an insurer. They're a health insurance company, and they basically wanted to personalize based off the degree of qualified interest above the funnel. Okay? So we had a stage for passive interest, a stage for qualified interest, a stage for researching plans, and then a stage for application initiated. In each case, the homepage and that experience would change based off of where that user is at in their buying journey of buying health insurance. So that's just one example of that. The interesting thing here is there's a lot of good reporting that shows where the different users are at in the plan, where the stages are at. And the cool opportunity here is it can really illuminate what your campaign strategy should be. So for example, if you're seeing, let's just say you had 75% of your users are stuck at stage 3. Well, now we could create a targeted email campaign directed to that segment of users to try to influence them progressing in the funnel. So it's a really great way to help drive what your campaigns should be. Doing a time check, 10 more minutes. Some tidbits on testing. A/B testing, most of you are probably familiar with the concept. Basically, in Sitecore, you can test 2 different pieces of content, 2 different variations, 2 different pages. You can do a multivariate page test. You can also do personalization testing. So the thing here is your homepage might have 200 different possible versions of your homepage. Because perhaps you have some A/B testing going on over here, you're testing different content. Maybe I have some different personalization coming over here. If you sum all that up, you might have hundreds of different versions of the page. So what you really need to be doing is running A/B tests every single time you publish to understand the impact of your changes. And the nice thing is Sitecore will run the test. A couple days later, they'll email you with the results, and then you can pick a winner if there was one. this just kind of shows how that works. Approve with test. It'll bring up a pop-up of what you're testing, and then the results of the test. So with personalization, I recommend, Sitecore's motto is test everything all the time. Hopefully you're doing that. But if you're not, and if you start doing personalization, you want to know the impact of what you're doing. Just kind of breezing through some of these because I only have a few minutes left. So the personalization testing is, there's opportunity to improve some of that. A couple things to think about. I'm just going to go through these. One thing I recommend is every time you publish a page, do it kind of a Pac-Man approach. So make a change, publish, test. Make a change, publish, test. Test every time you publish. Because between those publishes, you can check the engagement value over time and see the impact of your tests. And if you're doing a lot of stuff with personalization, that's probably the best way to see the results is in aggregate like that. There's other things you could do with scripts or to create custom reports, but that's the simplest approach. A couple things. Raise your hand if you've used the Experience Explorer before. Experience Explorer. One person. That sounds about right. The Experience Explorer is like the hidden treasure within Sitecore. The reality is you're configuring a lot of A/B tests, you're configuring a lot of personalization rules, and you're thinking, what the heck does my homepage even look like at this point? You can go into the Experience Explorer and simulate different users. So I could simulate a user came in from this Facebook campaign and they clicked on these pieces of content that triggered the Lenny persona. And they're from Georgia. Okay?
How do you do that?
Yeah.
How do you do that? Yeah, it's super easy. Do I have a screenshot? So basically, go into the Experience Editor, and then in the, there's a tab. It's the first button on the Home tab. You click on the little drop down. This is what I'm talking about. It's a hidden treasure. You got to find it. There's a drop down, and it'll say Editor, Explorer, and Debugger. And you choose Explorer, and it'll toggle to this.
Why, in chapter 11 of my book, available on Amazon, it all looks up something.
Yeah, that'd be chapter 2. But yeah, it's really great because you want to know what your site looks like, and chances are there's dozens of different combinations that'll affect what your website looks like. So this tool is invaluable.
So you can test your GeoIP location, even if you're in Maryland. You want to test for people in Texas.
Yes. It just forces. It just tells Sitecore to pretend I'm from Maryland. Yeah.
Now you tell us this.
All right, how to get started. I got 5 minutes left, so let me try to end on a pragmatic note. Thinking about tactical to transformational. Obviously, tactical represents a lot of low-hanging fruit that I do recommend. Going through the basics, developing personas, campaigns. I think campaigns are probably one of the most effective low-hanging fruit personalization opportunities. You probably have campaigns all over the place in your marketing department. Create a campaign in Sitecore that maps to your campaigns. You can manage campaigns in Sitecore. You're probably not doing that. But I think you should, at the very least, create a Sitecore campaign tag to map to your Facebook campaigns or whatever, so that when somebody enters your site from a campaign, I might want to personalize based off of that interaction. So that's great low-hanging fruit. I'll get into more of these in a minute. Let's just talk about these. The out-of-the-box rules, obviously a lot of low-hanging fruit there. There's 100 of them. You might find that it triggers a lot of ideas just by looking through those rules. Imagery, branding, I've mentioned a couple of scenarios there where it's low-hanging fruit, easy to do, doesn't take much time, but still could have an impact. Goals, events, outcomes, and failure events. Those 4 things are the most foundational elements to every Sitecore instance from a measurement perspective. Every single Sitecore instance, in my opinion, should have a measurement strategy that goes along with it. That measurement strategy basically articulates your strategy around goals, events, failure events, outcomes, and engagement value. You implement those into the tool, and just by having them exist, I can personalize. So a goal typically would be like a call to action. maybe subscribing to a newsletter or downloading a PDF or something like that, I can know that they downloaded this white paper 3 months ago. And because they downloaded it 3 months ago, I'm going to show them another call to action that typically represents that next step in the buying decision. So it's super easy and has huge impact on your business just by personalizing based on those things. Profile metadata, I mentioned that one rule. I mean, obviously it's very common. Most of you probably have done this, where your user profile schema has been extended to map to your unique metadata about your users. Well, you should be, if you did all that work to put it in Sitecore, you probably want to do something with it. Campaigns, I mentioned that already. One quick note on this. Oftentimes, most people don't have their landing pages in Sitecore. And I wouldn't even say you need to. A lot of times, Exact Target or whatever, there's landing pages in those tools. And oftentimes the strategy is to do a squeeze strategy. You email campaign drives a user onto a landing page with a very focused attention. They're trying to get that person to do one thing. And there's a lot of marketing theory around why that's how you should do it. The challenge is, again, in a B2B scenario, decisions aren't that easy. It might take a lot of research and analysis to do that one thing. And so the opportunity in my mind is, don't be so focused on squeeze pages anymore. Because if you have an email campaign linking to a landing page, you probably don't want them to leave the landing page. But to make that decision, they might need to leave the landing page. They might need to go to your website, do some research before they feel comfortable making that call to action. With this kind of personalization, now I can follow that user every step of the way. If they hit my landing page and then they visit 10 other pages, and then at this point they're ready to convert, let's have that call to action follow the user every step of the way. Because I have that insight into that campaign no matter where they go. And so that's kind of a nice thing, is I could have a call to action that follows the user no matter where they go on my website. Or if they come back 2 weeks later on my mobile phone or on an app or something like that, you can do that as well. All right, so walk. We just got done crawling, now we're walking. I recommend developing personas for each individual digital experience. Most of the time, if a company has personas, they're probably high-level corporate personas that align to some generic customer segments. That doesn't really help us when we're thinking about a particular website. A lot of companies might have 10 different websites, and the customers for those websites are probably different. And so I recommend different personas for each website, just so that you ensure you're getting at the right customer behaviors and you're not just doing abstract generalities. Map those personas into Sitecore, like we mentioned. That's going to facilitate a built-in content gap analysis. If you have 8 personas and you map those into Sitecore, you'll find that you're probably over-serving some customers and under-serving some other customers. And that's a great mechanism to perform that gap analysis, which then you can bring your editorial team into that process, and together you can work to fill those gaps and create a more robust content experience for your users. So develop that strategy, fill the gaps, then you configure the personalization at the intersection of the behaviors and those content needs. Extend into email. So I just mentioned an example where I have an email campaign. I can have an integrated web and email campaign working together to drive conversion because the two channels are now linked. FXM is another interesting thing. I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but it basically lets me take these personas and these personalization opportunities into non-Sitecore sites. A common example would be like a WordPress blog. We have our Sitecore site, but we have our blog on WordPress. If somebody goes from our blog to our site, wouldn't it be great if we knew, what blog article they were looking at, what topic, what keyword that they were on in that blog page, knowing that interest, we could personalize based off of that topic, or vice versa. If they go from our website to a blog post, it might be great to bring forth a call to action or something like that because of some insight we have. And FXM allows us to marry Sitecore with non-Sitecore sites. All right, last but not least, run. Take journey maps. If you don't have journey maps, if you're in a B2B business, you probably have journey maps. Implement those journeys as engagement plans. And personalize at that intersection of persona, journey, and content. Extend into CRM, commerce, and other marketing automation tools. You're probably using Pardot and other tools, and integrating those tools together to create a combined marketing ecosystem. There's a lot of power and potential there. So when people ask me, what should we put in a personalization strategy? This is my answer. A personalization strategy deliverable, in my opinion, should represent these pieces. It should represent the low-hanging fruit. It should represent a measurement strategy. I mentioned that already. Goals, events, failure events. Your strategy should understand the personas that are interacting with these experiences, the journeys that those personas are on, content strategy that aligns and supports those personas and that journey, and then an integration strategy that brings all that data together. So when I think about a personalization strategy deliverable, it articulates all of these elements and really conveys this kind of message. Because personalization is really the tip of the iceberg. Everything below it is your content, your users, the journey that they're on. So that's what that deliverable should look like in my opinion. That's it. Any questions before I kick it over to Dean? Yep.
One of the things I see a lot, I think that personalization is a great buzzword. Sitecore's been bandying it about for years.
Yeah.
And I would be willing to bet that the vast majority of the Sitecore projects that are done across the world, personalization is a key piece of that's driving that, and it almost universally gets pushed off into some vague phase 2. Always.
Yeah.
It generally never happens.
Yeah.
Because what happens is the marketing team believes, oh, we just bought this CMS.
Yeah.
It's automagical. This is just going to happen. How do you convince them that's not the case? That there's a lot of work that happens here, and in the end, there is no magic here. You're simply telling Sitecore what you want to show the individuals.
Yeah.
That there is no magic. What's your advice for
Sure.
passing that
A couple things. I mean, you're right. This is a lot of work.
Sure. And
You don't just-
they're going to tell you they're already doing a ton of work.
Yeah.
Where great. So what we get for doing great work is more work. That's what they're going to tell you.
Pretty much. Think about this. Think about FXM for a minute.
Sure.
So today, people, they buy Sitecore, and then they spend 12 months building this huge website. And then they launch it, and then to your point, now there's this phase 2, and 9 months later, so it takes 2 years before they're getting the value out of the platform. And there's a ton of free CMSs out there, right? If that's all you use it for, you're not from Sitecore anymore, but the point of buying Sitecore is these capabilities.
Sure, no, I understand.
And it takes 2 years to get there. I think the opportunity is to have a parallel track. So yeah, you're gonna build your website, but in parallel, we're gonna use FXM on your current website. And on your current website, we're gonna do personalization. We're gonna start configuring rules. We're gonna start doing A/B testing. We're gonna start taking that content out of that website and putting it into a generic content tree with
So they're seeing
global content. Yeah. So after a year, think about the potential. You go live with your Sitecore site, but you go live with 12 months of data.
Right.
You go live with 12 months of experience using the tool, and you get that value day one. I think that's an interesting conversation to have with customers, is challenge them on the notion of, if you build it, they will come, and say, we're going to have 2 tracks. We're going to have our strategy track, and we're going to have our technology track. And certainly the two, there are going to be points where they intersect and they collaborate, but we're going to give you value day one. I think that's been a really intriguing conversation. And actually the 3rd track with SXA, Sitecore Experience Accelerator, that's a game changer. That whole 12-month thing, I think is going to look very different in the years to come. And the time to market is going to get increasingly smaller, which will have a huge impact on services companies. You probably consider that. But the whole model of this huge project resulting in, 2 years later you're getting value, that has to change. And I think with FXM, it can change day one. And with SXA, it will change, because it's just going to be faster and easier to build sites.
Well, they're going after smaller customers too. When you look at the consumption licensing that they're making available now, it's no longer that you've got to sink in $500,000 to get a license.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're not going to see these, you're going to see more builds that don't have that massive budget.
Yeah, $100,000 Sitecore site will become fairly common,
Right. No, I agree.
which is a good thing. Yeah.
I just want to add to the point though about phase 2. The biggest problem has been the partners. The partners have kicked the can down the road and buckled as soon as the customer says, well, I don't have the budget. Okay, well, we'll just deploy the CMS.
Sure.
And that's what really has to change, is that the partners have actually set it up so that customers can't take advantage of the platform. And so the key is that even if they're not going to take advantage of it in phase 1, it has to be deployed in phase 1, because then phase 2 never comes.
That's exactly
How many
right.
years later?
Phase 2
you
never
gotta-
comes.
Right, so it's convincing the customer that, hey, yeah, there's a small uptick in cost right now for doing it, but it's going to be a huge uptick, and the benefit is there.
Well, that's what's so great about SXA is that $1 million build.
Yeah.
Half of that now is strategy work. And so it's pretty compelling.
And the thing is, the partners can also start thinking about, the long road technology roadmap for the customer. How about digital asset management? How about community? How about other stuff? So start thinking beyond, yeah, your revenue's going to be cut, but you become a trusted advisor.
Right.
Move on.
One of the, small comment, kind of referring to what you're saying, is we were one of those people who bought Sitecore and put it off to the shelf next year. And we didn't work with us, but it's kind of sort of like that college 20-page paper you got to write that you're dreading, but once you start it, you kind of get the outline going, and it starts to make sense, and it helps you kind of think more forward, and then you become more excited about it. It's just really kind of getting past that hurdle, opening the door, and kind of getting in there, and so like kind of pulling back the layers and stuff that you really need to do. Then once you realize that the work it is a lot of work, it's true, but at the same time, once you kind of start that work, it's like a snowball that rolls downhill, and then you come to see more, and FXM is definitely helpful.
So for the partners in the room, and for customers too, this deliverable is the start of that snowball. It's a great place to, you might have the big project, right? But you force them to buy this, because this is where it all starts. If you can have that measurement strategy and you're articulating goals, failure events, and outcomes, it's so easy to extend that and to start using that data. That'd be my recommendations. Maybe you won't. You're not going to be able to sell a $200,000 personalization strategy, but you can probably sell a $20,000 measurement strategy that creates a built-in, organic, ongoing relationship with your customer on mapping these metrics and taking advantage of those analytics. That'd be another way to create a parallel path when budgets are tight.
They're always tight.
Yeah. Question over here?
No.
Okay. All right. Thanks for your time, guys. Appreciate it.